Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with, even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is day 2, the second day of this Rohatsu session here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico in December 2019. And of course, as you already know, the Rohatsu session is a reminder, among other things, of the efforts of the Buddha. And knowing that each of us really are an uncovered Buddha, perhaps is the way to put it, we too can have that same experience that he had on the 8th morning of this long period of retreat that he sat under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, India. Along with that, we have a great deal of assistance this time of year because many, many different Buddhist groups all over the world are doing the same deep sesshin, the same deep meditation retreat at the same time. And so the efforts of all of us amplify the efforts of each one of us. And that is something to take heart with. Traditionally, in the Rinzai Zen, we share with you on each day the Rohatsu exhortations of Hakuin, Ekaku, the Zen master, the Rinzai Zen master, who single-handedly resurrected Rinzai Zen. He was quite the fellow. Must have been an interesting personality to have as a teacher. There is a portrait statue in his temple, Shoinji, which still exists and still is a place of practice, although not so much regular Rinzai practice. When I visited there a number of times, one of the times I looked at their chant book, and there were many, many chants having to do with Kanon, Kuan Yin. Most likely because Hakuin's, at least one of his awakening experiences happened in reference to Kanon. And he had a great deal of reverence for this bodhisattva of compassion. There are many, many scrolls, many, many paintings that he did with Kanon showing his face as Kanon's face. And in the way every single one of us has the face of Kuan Yin, the face of compassion, and the face of Manjusi, the bodhisattva of wisdom. We are filled with enormous amounts of compassion and wisdom. Why don't we always act that way? Well, it's because we don't really clearly see and live the truth of who we are. And coming together to do meditation together, particularly at this time of year, in this particular session, we are working deeply to recognize our true nature and to bring it to life in everything we do or say or think. So I'd like to share first Hakuin's exhortations for the second night. The second night, the master said, and by the way, these are all translations by Norman Waddell, who is a premier translator of Hakuin. It's almost as if he was Hakuin, which is a little odd because he is not a person of Zen practice. He originally went to Japan to study poetry, to study haiku with R.H. Blythe. And he has a beautiful way with words. He really is a poet. But somehow he has grasped the energy of Hakuin and is able to put it into translated words that are truly inspiring and they seem to show Hakuin's personality. So on the second night, the master said, the Shurangama Sutra says, that when a person returns to truth with a capital T, in the attainment of the way, everything in all the 10 directions, including empty space itself, vanishes without a trace. And here it's speaking of a deep samadhi. When we have entered the deepest samadhi, or at least a deep samadhi, we disappear. Everything disappears. Of course, then it comes back. But it comes back, we find ourselves a changed person. If we have gone deeply enough in that samadhi, but it's important not to seek a samadhi, but rather to give yourself so fully to the practice, the experiencing of the energy in the body as we extend the out-breath so far that we are almost gasping. It lets everything else go. And this is its gift. And as we let more and more go, we are more likely to enter that samadhi of some level. And there are many, many levels of samadhi. But to enter some somewhat deep level of samadhi is vital in order to have this shift in understanding, this opening, this clarity, this kensho, this seeing into the nature of reality. A rather less deep samadhi would simply be the one where you find yourself engrossed in a really interesting book or a movie. But these things are not transformative at that level. It has to be a deep samadhi for it truly to be transformable. Anywhere people engage in the practice of this way, protecting deities and obstructing deities are also present. It is like crowds gathering in towns and cities and drawing thieves there as well. When a student's mind is focused firmly in the great vow of universal salvation, the protecting deities gain strength. But when the mind begins to waver and impede itself, it is the obstructing deities who strengthen. And often in day 2, that's what we experience. Day 1, classically in the trajectory of a sesshin, is one where we're sort of getting back our sea legs as we sit on the cushion. Day 2 is when some of the shit begins to hit the fan, to use colloquial terms. And we can struggle. All manner of obstructions can come up, all kinds of ideas about whether we have the capacity to come to awakening or not, whether we're really on the right path, whether we're doing it right or not, and then also makyo, such as there was something sort of on the order of, did I leave the stove on when I left? And we think of all kinds of things that are really, really so much more important to do right now than sit zazen. That's often what happens day 2, unless we are a truly seasoned practitioner. And even then, we may get tickled a bit by this type of mind state. It is thus absolutely essential that you begin your practice by arousing the great bodhisattva vow, focusing your mind with selfless humility on the suffering of sentient beings, rooting it in the fervent prayer that each and every one of them reach the deliverance of enlightenment. No one has ever attained full realization of the great way of the Buddhas who was not inspired by the power of this vow. Let's see, I think it may possibly continue on the next page. It is like the practice of archery. You won't hit the center of the target the first or second time you shoot an arrow. But in time, if you continue to practice diligently, you are sure to grasp the knack. In practicing Zen, it is the same. A great burning resolve must well up each and every instant of thought, focusing all your energy on penetrating the profound source of the Buddha way. When you are able to do this without wavering for even a single instant of thought, the Dharma truth cannot help manifesting itself in its entirety before your very eyes. You will arrive at the Buddha's supreme enlightenment with less effort than it takes to reach down and pick up a piece of dirt at your feet. That's Hakuin's encouragement. It's important not to get any ideas about where we might be on some sort of assumed ruler of progress, because there's probably 99.99.99% chance that you're wrong. The teacher can see, without you saying a word, where you're at, but often the practicer is the last one to know. It's an interesting story from Rochester where there was a woman who had been practicing for a while, and it was in sesshin, and she had come to that particular sesshin out of an environment of family challenges. There nothing specific said about what those family challenges were, but they were concerning. And so time for doksan, as it's called there, and she's up there in the doksan waiting line, and just as she gets to the student bell, ready to await Mitra-roshi's ringing of his handbell, exiting the previous student from the room, all of a sudden all the family stuff comes up in spades. She's just almost overwhelmed by it. And he rings his bell, and she rings the bell, and she goes into doksan and has a kensho. So don't bother trying to figure out where you're at. As long as you keep practicing, as Hakuin said, you can't fail to have an opening into the truth any more than you wouldn't be able to bend down and pick up something at your feet. This is why faith is such a vital importance in our practice. Because we're flying blind, as we said yesterday, often there's no clues whatsoever that we're even going in the right direction, as if we could even discern a direction to go in. Faith, the curiosity, the perplexity, the doubt, and the determination to find out, to become free, to let go this burden of all that being somebody implies and carries with it, whether it's implied or not. The practice works, but it's important to have faith that it works. We wouldn't be sitting here on December 6th, 2019, how many millennia after the Buddha had his original awakening and began teaching people how to come to awakening? Surely something must work. And it does. And it can work for you. There's no question about it. If you apply yourself diligently, it'll happen. Don't bother with a timeline. Often when it takes a long time to have an insight, that insight is quite a bit deeper than it would have been had one shortly after beginning practice. And if you have it too soon, you don't have the basis to support it with. I know one person who had an insight. She used to lie on her back in the evening, looking at the stars, questioning questioning when she was a college student. And she had a breakthrough. But like Flora Courtois, who also had a breakthrough spontaneously, this friend, her family decided that something was wrong with her and put her in a mental hospital. And that actually is where Bowden, who's now the head of the Rochester Zen Center and has been for some years, discovered her when he was also in college and he was working there as an orderly. And if we do have it, even after we've begun practice, if it's too soon, like I said, we don't have the basis to support it. Don't doubt that every time you sit down, focus your mind on the practice, something is happening underground. And it is gradually moving you in the direction of awakening. It can take longer, it can take shorter, but it will get there, as Hakuin says, if you persist. And that's why determination is so important. Another thing that's vital, and this does not depend at all on the cushion, not that practicing depends on the cushion either. What is vital is to practice increasing awareness and presence. The mindfulness movement is roaring ahead these days in the world. It's become quite popular because it does show, even at the relatively superficial level of mindfulness that many people engage in, that it can have very positive health results, if nothing else. Many years ago, there was a study on people who have psoriasis, and the treatment for psoriasis apparently is to stand naked under, I think it's UV light or something in particular like that, for an extended period of time, a very long extended period of time. And John Kabat-Zinn, who, by the way, learned meditation through the Rochester Zen Center, thought, well, it's terribly boring. Let's teach them some breath practice, see if it makes a difference. And lo and behold, it did. I think it cut the time needed for the treatment by something like 20 minutes, a treatment. At any rate, he's gone on to experiment with many other health conditions, and it is known to make a positive difference in a person's health when they pay attention, when they are mindful. Unfortunately, our society is working against that direction because we have so many electronic toys to play with, in particular these little cell phones, which we can connect with 24/7, which, by the way, is causing interference with people's quality of sleep and all manner of things. And there are some pretty stupid things that people do when they're so engrossed walking along or driving along and involved with their little cell phones. People have walked off the ends of docks unwittingly. And there's the classic problem, it's quite widespread, of accidents caused by texting or talking on the phone while you're driving. It's known that there is no such thing as multitasking. What we thought was multitasking is really sporadic fractions of seconds of attention in one direction and then another direction and another direction and another direction, and the result is pretty bad for our brain and for our life too, because we end up with an extremely fractured life. It affects memory in the negative because we're not focusing long enough and fully enough on any given experience to retain it. And so there's also a very deep unsettledness in our psyche that comes about as a result. But bottom line is that the more we can pay attention, and that means 100% attention. That means attention not only to what's going on outside, supposedly, but also what's going on inside. What are the energies that are running through our body? How do they feel? Are we jumping to conclusions about them? Are we trying to shut them down? What's going on inside? What's going on outside? Distracted living is only half living, and is rife with accidents and disappointments and dysfunction. To do the practice, the more we can pay attention all the time, makes an enormous difference. Because really what awakening is seeing clearly what's there in front of our eyes. And if we've always got something else in front of our eyes, our little cell phone or an idea or thoughts about something or feelings about ourselves, it provides a barrier to that experience of the truth. And of course, we're going to go through life with feelings about ourselves and with feelings about situations. And there are going to be moments where we are distracted because we are trying to do one thing and we're also in our mind trying to solve some other problem. But it's important to be as careful as possible in our moment-to-moment being, to be present. This may be what's behind Dogen's specific, very, very precise and specific instructions about everything. And the way the oryoki, the nested bowls, are used traditionally in Soto is an exercise in absolute attention. He's been called by someone I know, the original OCD, obsessive compulsive person. But I suspect it was in interest of helping his students focus deeply enough that they could come to awakening. We get annoyed when we're asked to do something more carefully or to put something away where it belongs instead of just leaving it out wherever we thought we would leave it. But to pay attention, for example, where the dish soap bottle really lives, and to put it back there when you're finished using it, can actually assist in our practice. There's an idea in Zen that if we just engage ourselves 100% in the koan, that nothing else matters except the koan. Well, there's a story in Obama, Japan, of a man who had gone to Sesshin, I think it was Rohatsu Sesshin actually, at Hoshinji, and he was so engrossed in his koan, which was Mu, that on returning home, there's a heck of a lot of train tracks you have to cross. Getting to that temple, by the way, something like 14 or 15 train tracks. And as he was about to cross a train track, there was a train coming and he did not notice it, but the engineer did and honked the horn, and he jumped out of the way just in time not to be hit, and it triggered a Kensho experience. Probably because he was so present with the shock of the train being right there and having to jump out of the way, that the jump just happened with this profound awareness, and that triggered the Kensho experience. His mind was ripe. We can ripen our mind by putting things away too, where they belong. And it's important. In our Western culture, it's all too easy to be sloppy, to be casual about things, and the quality of life diminishes when we're like that. It's not about becoming obsessive compulsive. It's about becoming aware and attentive and careful and present. And that will go a long way to deepening our practice. I'd like to share with you a little bit from a book called Fathoming the Mind. This is a translation of a Tibetan teaching. But fathoming the mind is actually what we do in our practice, whether we work on a koan or whether we do exclusively the extended out-breath. That extended out-breath also is working with a koan. It's just not one of the classic breakthrough koans. That koan is the koan of curiosity, of perplexity, of yearning to return to something that you sense that you've lost track of too long ago and you need to return to because it's so vital. Life is full of opportunities for perplexity. Who are we? Who is it that sees what's out the window? Who is it that stubs their toe on an upended piece of sidewalk? Who is it that has to walk through the soupy mud and gets our shoes all muddy? And what do we think about that? How do we feel about that? What is the direct experience of walking through that unsteady ground? So I'll share with you just a little bit. This is actually subtitled Inquiry and Insight into Dudjom Lingpa's Vajra Essence. It's translated by B. Alan Wallace. And he's talking about that period of time just as we're starting to wake up from a sleep, a nap or an overnight sleep, it doesn't matter. And this is a really ripe time to dive into the presence of mind because we're not yet back in our uniform, so to speak, of assumptions about who we are and what life is about. There is a moment of naked awareness just as we're emerging from sleep, where the person, the me, the I, hasn't gained the top seat yet. And it is a space between thought. It has direct access to nature of mind. And it's a really excellent place to practice because every day, usually, we go to sleep. And every day, hopefully, we wake up. But in those moments, those naked moments after beginning to wake up, tune in. Stretch your mind and reach for, well, there's lots of names. The truth, true essence, true nature, our true self, our face before our parents were born, and any number of other expressions. You don't have to name it. Explore it. See if you can remain a few extra moments in that empty space. The teacher replies that the way to realize the great perfection is to realize emptiness, which is the common ground of all yanas, from the Shravakas to the great perfection. These are the ways of practice. Here is an enormously important statement. The basis for the delusion of all beings is in the desire form and formless realms, is ignorance about oneself alone, the so-called I. The basis for the delusion of all beings in the desire, form, and formless realms is ignorance about oneself alone, the so-called I. From the great perfection perspective, the Buddha's second noble truth of the origin of suffering can be summarized in one sentence. Suffering results from two causes: mistaking that which is not I as being I, that means me, and failing to recognize who you really are. Not knowing is ignorance, the root of samsara. Grasping at that which is not I or mine, including this body and mind, as being I or mine, is delusion. Out of delusion flow the mental afflictions of craving, hostility, and all the miseries of the world. Once this illness has been diagnosed, the treatment is straightforward. Stop all delusional activity stemming from craving and hostility. Stop reifying external objects and yourself as being truly existence. Realize who you actually are and wake up. Realize who you actually are and wake up. By what method is this to be accomplished? The teacher answers, you must examine the basis and root of the origin, location, and destination of your very own self. The reference of your sense of I. Where does it emerge? Where does it abide? And where does it finally go? Here are the quintessential questions of Vipassana on the nature of the self. From where did you originate, and where are you right now, and where will you go from here? This I, whence does it emerge, where does it abide, and where does it finally go? And as you extend the out-breath far enough that other things begin to let go, you open, or you begin to open into a place of deeper awareness. And if you go far enough, and there will initially be fear at that point, you will be on the threshold of stepping into a deeper level of awareness with the potential for awakening. Simply through the extended out-breath, if you do that out-breath, not as a physical exercise, but accompanied by the need to know, by the curiosity, the yearning to find out. You can put it in whatever words you want. You don't need to put it in any words, because you are here in this zendo at this time because something is moving you to want to understand something deeper, to reach, to return to something deeper. It's vitally important. And when you do return to it deeply enough, it is transformative. We have the practice, and the practice is effective. The challenge for each of us is to maintain that practice, to keep it going, because the curiosity will vanish suddenly. And there's a part of us that is invested in the status quo, no matter how painful it is. And so we hesitate to jump off that cliff into the unknown. But when you realize you have no ground under your feet, which is the feeling that can come at the end of the out-breath, recognize that you don't need ground under your feet. You can fly. Thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.